Hello and welcome to Daily News Simplified, the what, why and how of newspaper analysis. Today we have taken up important news and articles from the perspective of UPSC examination from The Hindu newspaper Delhi edition dated 25th November 2022. Topics for today's discussion are displayed on your screen. Let's begin the discussion. So the first topic for today's discussion is based on Election Commission and is related to this news which featured in The Hindu newspaper page number 1. Now this news is regarding Supreme Court judge raising concern over appointment of Chief Election Commissioner. Now recently Supreme Court has also raised question over declining number of days that Chief Election Commissioners are serving. Now if you can see GS paper 2 syllabus, the salient feature of Representation of People Act along with appointment to various constitutional posts, powers, function and responsibilities of various constitutional bodies has been mentioned. Question based on constitutional post and constitutional bodies are recurring themes in both UPSC prelims examination as well as mains examination. So today in this discussion we will be taking up the constitutional provisions related to Election Commission. Along with this, we will be also looking into the role of Election Commission, the challenges and criticism that Election Commission faces, and the way forward based on recommendation of various committees. So let's begin the discussion. Now as we know, preamble to the Indian Constitution while defining the nature of India declares India to be a democratic republic. Democracy was regarded as the basic feature of the Constitution as was evident in the Indira Gandhi versus Rajnarayan case in 1975. Now what is democracy? The democratic polity is based on the principle of popular sovereignty, which means supreme power with the people. You all must have heard about famous quote that democracy is a method of government which is by the people, for the people and of the people. So in crude terms, democracy is a system of government in which people elect their representatives. So there are two kinds of democratic setup. First is direct, in which referendum, recall, plebiscite and initiatives are the tool. The second one is indirect democracy, in which people choose their representative who in turn joins the parliament and make laws for the people. So it's kind of delegation by the people to their representative. Now indirect democracy can be further subdivided into two categories, that is parliamentary form of democracy and presidential form of democracy. India opted for parliamentary form of indirect democracy. And one of the most important features of the democratic polity is the elections at regular intervals. Election constitute the signpost of the democracy, and these are the medium through which the attitude, values, beliefs of the people towards their political environment are reflected. The growth of democracy is possible only when people are entitled to participate in the democratic process of the country. According to Article 326, elections in India are conducted on the basis of adult suffrage, which is most important pillar of the democracy. And in order to ensure free and fair election, Constitution establishes the Election Commission of India. Now having said that, let us look into the constitutional provisions related to the Election Commission of India. Now as we know, Article 324 of Part 15 of the Constitution deals with the provisions related to elections in India. Article 324 subclause 1 says the superintendence, direction and control of the preparation of the electoral rolls for the conduct of all elections to Parliament, to the legislature of every state and of election to the offices of President and Vice President held under this Constitution shall be vested in a commission referred to in this Constitution as the Election Commission. So now you know the broader role of the Election Commission, that is superintendence, direction and control of election of various bodies including Parliament, State Legislature, President and Vice President. Now while discussing these provisions, we will also highlight some criticism or challenges related to the Election Commission. Now subclause 2 says, Election Commission shall consist of Chief Election Commissioner and such number of other election commissioners, if any, as the President may from time to time fix and the appointment of the Chief Election Commissioner and other election commissioners shall, subject to the provision of any law made in the behalf by Parliament, be made by the President. So President is the appointing authority. Now, if you will look into the evolution of Election Commission, you will find that when it was constituted in 1950, it was a single member body consisting of Chief Election Commissioner. Now, in the year 1989, President appointed 2 more election commissioners to cope with the increased work of the Election Commission on account of lowering of the voting age from 21 to 18. Thereafter, the Election Commission functioned as a multi-member body consisting of 3 election commissioners. However, the 2 posts of the election commissioners were abolished in 1990. An election commission was reverted to the earlier position with 1 chief election commissioner. However, again in 1993, the President appointed 2 more election commissioners. Since then until today, the Election Commission has been functioning as a multi-member body consisting of 3 election commissioners. As the provision says that President may from time to time fix the appointment of CEC and other election commissioner. By virtue of this power, the number of members of election commissioner has been increased and decreased with passage of time. Now subclause 3 says, when any other election commissioner is so appointed, the chief election commissioner shall act as a chairman of the election commission. Now subclause 4 talks about the appointment of regional commissioner. Now again, President is the appointing authority as written here. The President may also appoint after consultation with Election Commission such regional commissioners as he may consider necessary to assist the Election Commission in the performance of the function conferred on the Commission by Clause 1. Now pay attention to the subclause 5. It talks about the appointment and removal of Election Commissioner and regional commissioners. It says that subject to the provision of any law made by Parliament, the conditions of service and tenure of office of the election commissioners and regional commissioners shall be such as the President may by rule determine, provided that Chief Election Commissioner shall not be removed from his office except in like manner and on the like ground as a judge of the Supreme Court, and the condition of service of Chief Election Commissioner shall not be varied to his disadvantage after his appointment. Now pay focus. The provisions here are related to the CEC only. There are no words regarding other 2 commissioners or the regional commissioners. The subclause 5 further says that provided further that any other election commissioner or regional commissioner shall not be removed from office except on the recommendation of the Chief Election Commissioner. So as you have seen, while Chief Election Commissioner can be removed only on the basis of the method as is suggested for Supreme Court judges, there is no security with respect to Regional Commissioner and other election commissioner. They can be removed on the basis of recommendation of the Chief Election Commissioner. Now subclause 6 says, the President or the Governor of a state shall, when so requested by the Election Commission, make available to the Election Commission or to a Regional Commissioner such staff as may be necessary for the discharge of the function conferred on the Election Commission by Clause 1. Now this is another criticism, as they don't have a separate and independent secretariat. They have to be dependent on executive for their functions. So there is a legitimate concern over the independence of the Election Commission. Now having seen the constitutional provisions, let us look into role played by Election Commission. Now some important role of Election Commission have been enlisted here. The first role is to determine the territorial areas of the electoral constituency throughout the country on the basis of Delimitation Commission Act of the Parliament. Second role is to prepare and periodically revise electoral rolls and to register all eligible voters. The third role is to notify the dates and schedules of election and to scrutinize nomination papers. Another role is to grant recognition to political parties and allot election symbols to them. It also acts as a court for settling disputes relating to granting of recognition to political parties and allotment of election symbols to them. It also determines the code of conduct to be observed by the parties and the candidates at the time of election. Now, under its advisory role, it has a role to advise the President on matters relating to the qualification of the members of Parliament. It also advises the President whether the election can be held in a state under President's rule in order to extend the period of emergency after 1 year. It has a duty to cancel polls in the event of rigging, booth capturing, violence and other irregularities. Election Commission has a role to register political parties for the purpose of elections and grant them the status of national or state parties on the basis of their poll performance. Now, having seen the role of the Election Commission, let us have a look at the challenges related to the Election Commission of India. The first we already have seen while going through the constitutional provision that Constitution has not prescribed the qualifications of the members of the Election Commission. While Constitution defines various aspects like their appointment, removal, power and duties, it does not specify the qualification for being a member of Election Commission. The Constitution has not specified the term of the member of Election Commission. Now, by law, they have been provided with a 6-year term or 65 years of age, whichever is early, but this has not been mentioned in the Constitution itself. The Constitution has not debarred the retiring election commissioners from any other appointment by the government. So it does affect the impartiality and integrity of the election commissioners, as an aspiration for any lucrative appointment post-retirement may affect their impartiality and integrity. Now, another challenge that we saw during discussing the constitutional provisions, we saw that impeachment process is only defined for the Chief Election Commissioner, while others can be removed by President on the recommendation of CEC. While according to the section 29A of the RPA 1951, EC is responsible for registering the political parties, it has no power to deregister them. Another issue which has been raised recently is that the Model Code of Conduct does not have a legal backing. Now there is a debate over this issue, as some people say that if you will give a legal backing to the Model Code of Conduct, then there would be burden of litigations. Now, another issue that Election Commission faces is their expense is voted upon by Parliament, thereby giving financial control to legislature and executive. As we have already discussed that EC does not have a separate secretariat. So, for the appointment also and for finances also, they are dependent on executive. Now, EC has been demanding the power to countermand election on the ground of bribery. But this demand has been rejected by the government, as they argue that proving the case of bribery is a difficult task. So at present, Election Commission has no power to countermand an election on ground of bribery. Now, having discussed the challenges, let us look into some suggestions put forward by various committees like Dinesh Goswami, Tarkunde Committee and 255th Law Commission. The first suggestion is need for parity. Parity in relation to the process of removal of CEC with that of other commissioners, including regional commissioners. Second suggestion is that EC's expenses should be charged on Consolidated Fund of India as against present practice of voted upon by the Parliament. These committees also suggest a separate and independent secretariat, having powers to appoint, transfer and promote its staff and officers. This will insulate personnel from executive and political interference. Suggestions also include collegium-based appointment. It says that appointment of all election commissioners, including the Chief Election Commissioner, should be made by the President in consultation with 3-member collegium or selection committee, consisting of Prime Minister, the Leader of Opposition of the Lok Sabha, and the Chief Justice of India. It also talks about the seniority should be taken into account while elevating an election commissioner, unless the 3-member collegium committee for reason to be recorded in writing finds such commissioner unfit. These committees have also suggested granting power to the election commission to postpone or declare election void in case of bribery. The 255th Law Commission has suggested that bribery during election to be made cognizable offense and enhance punishment up to 2 years. It also suggests EC to have power to deregister political parties. Our next discussion is based on this news which featured on The Hindu newspaper, page number 1. Now this news talks about a statement by Finance Ministry, and in this statement, Finance Ministry has said that the outlook for India's export may be dented by the global slowdown, but resilient domestic demand and a reinvigorated investment cycle will push the economy's growth and spark a rebound in jobs in the coming months. Now, if you will relate it to your GS syllabus, you will find mention of Indian economy and issues relating to planning, mobilization of resources, growth, development and employment. Now, as you know, India's vision of becoming a $5 trillion economy by 2024 is intricately linked with an export-oriented approach. Greater integration with global value chains will enable India to attract investment, create jobs, boost export and hence sustain virtuous economic cycle. Now here in this discussion, we will look into some important aspect of India's trade. We will also look into need for an export-led model. Then we will look into the challenges in achieving this, and then we will discuss the way forward. So let's take up the discussion. Now before moving to the main discussion, we must look into some important aspect of India's trade. Now India's share in the world's export has remained stagnant at 1.6% in last decade. India is still critically dependent on import of critical goods such as pulses, oilseeds, electronic goods, active pharmaceutical ingredients, that is APIs, etc., which shows lack of self-sufficiency of Indian economy. Imports into India is much higher than exports, thus resulting into current account deficit. India's export basket is dominated by capital-intensive goods such as petroleum products, gems, jewelry, etc., rather than labor-intensive goods such as textiles and leather, etc. Undoubtedly, the forex reserves have increased to all-time high. However, it is mainly on account of increase in volatile FPI inflows rather than on account of export surplus. And lastly, India has failed to get integrated into global value chains as is done by the China. Now, having seen the important aspects of the India's trade, let us look into need for an export-led model. Now, there are empirical evidences in support of export-led model. Countries such as Japan, South Korea, Singapore, etc. have been able to sustain higher economic growth by following export-led strategy. In the recent times, such an export-led strategy has benefited both bigger economies such as China as well as smaller economies such as Vietnam. Here, take a look at the export-led virtuous cycle. Economic growth will result into increase in export. Now this increase in exports will result in increased compensation and innovation. Now innovation will lead to the job creation, that is enhanced job creation, and it will further attract more investment and which in turn will again give push to the economic growth. Now second reason why we need the export-led growth model is shift from consumption-led to investment and export-driven model. India's growth drivers highlight that its economic growth has been primarily propelled by domestic demand, which account for 60% of India's GDP. However, exports account only 12% GDP. It should also be recognized that an economy with only $2,000 per capita income will not be able to expand simply based on domestic demand. Moreover, too much focus on domestic demand might strengthen imports faster than exports. which could potentially lead to a widening deficit. Now there is a conducive environment in terms of decline in export from China on account of US-China trade war, rising labor cost and growing anti-China sentiments, etc. So there is a opportunity for India to grab that position. Now, by integrating Assemble in India for the world into Make in India, India can raise its export market share to about 3.5%, which is at present at 1.6% by 2025 and up to 6% by 2030. India would create about 4 crore well-paid jobs by 2025 and about 8 crores by 2030. Now, rising export will definitely give push to the innovation and efficiency too, as the exporter will have to adopt for new technologies in order to boost their exports. Having discussed the need for export-led growth model, let us look into challenges in boosting exports. Now we can broadly divide these challenges into 3 categories. First is supply side challenges, second is policy related challenges, and third is demand side challenges. Let's look into them one by one. Now a major problem is dwarf size MSME sectors. These MSMEs account for about 40% of the India's export and 45% of India's manufacturing output. However, these MSMEs face problems with respect to factors of production such as land, labor, capital. In addition to that, most of MSMEs use obsolete technologies which leads to poor efficiency and thus poor competitiveness. Now, second cause of worry is higher logistical cost. India's logistics cost as share of GDP is 14%, which is high when compared to developed nations, where it ranges between 8 to 10%. Higher logistics cost in turn reduces the overall competitiveness of Indian economy. Another supply side challenge is trade facilitation. It involves reducing the number of documents needed for trade. Trade facilitation reduces the time to export and cost of exports too. In India, trade facilitation as measured by trading across border is quite poor. Trading across border is one of the parameters for measuring World Bank's ease of doing business. Now, another challenge is related to the innovation. India spends hardly around 0.7% of its GDP on R&D, which is quite lower in comparison to 2.1% of USA and 2.8% of China and 4.3% of Israel. Improvement in innovation ecosystem would help us improve manufacturing competitiveness and help us manufacture high quality goods for the global market. Now another challenge is related to consumer preference in export market. Now another challenge is lack of market intelligence. It relates to the consumer preference in export market. For example, higher level of sweetness in Indian mangoes is not necessarily find market in many countries. Another supply side challenge is lack of identification. Each district of our country has a potential equivalent to that of a small country in boosting exports. However, there is lack of focus on identifying potential export clusters within a state. Now, another challenge is lack of coordination among multiple government ministries and departments involved in boosting export. Now, there are some adverse impact of free trade agreements too, with countries such as Japan, South Korea, etc. It has led to inverted duty structure, which has in turn encouraged import of finished good and discouraged domestic manufacturing. Now, if we will see the policy side challenges, the first challenge is delay in announcement and then application of various announcements. For example, delay in announcement of incentives under road schemes. Even though this scheme was announced on 1st January 2021, the government has notified the guidelines in August 2021. Now another issue is whenever there is increase in price of agriculture commodities such as onion, potato, etc., the government imposes an ad hoc ban on export of such commodities. This affects India's image as a reliable supplier of agriculture commodity. Now there are some demand side challenges too. First is the rising protectionist policies in importing countries in shape of high import duties and quota limits. and they act as a barrier for exporting countries. Now there is a competition for India in terms of market access. Goods from countries such as Bangladesh, Vietnam, etc. enter into export markets such as EU and USA at almost zero custom duty. However, Indian goods enter such markets with comparatively higher custom duty, and thus our goods become uncompetitive. India's export of textiles and leather to USA and EU has been declining on account of this issue only. Now another big challenge is WTO norms related to sanitary and phytosanitary measures by various countries. Now indiscriminate application of sanitary and phytosanitary measures against Indian products have affected Indian exports adversely. For example, basmati and non-basmati rice exports to the US have been rejected multiple times on grounds of low hygiene standards. Similarly, the issue of pesticides residue is frequently raised by the EU and Japan. Having discussed the key highlights and need for export-led growth, along with the challenges in achieving so, let us look into the way forward. Now first is to improve trade competitiveness by improving access to factors of production like land, labor, capital. Reduce logistic cost, that is 14% at present, to global benchmark of 8% of GDP, and improving ease of doing business. Protect domestic markets from import cheap foreign goods through a strong and effective technical regulation, trade safeguards such as anti-dumping duty and safeguard duties. Better interministerial coordination is also a prerequisite for an export-led growth market. We need to provide hand-holding support to MSMEs. The need of R is hand-holding support to MSMEs. MSMEs need to have access to factors of production and use appropriate technology to boost exports. Now, increasing access to formal finance is another prerequisite. Less than 4% of small firms in India have access to formal finance. The figure for US, China, Vietnam and Sri Lanka is around 21%. Now, as per the recommendation of Baba Kalyani Committee, we need to reorient SEZ, that is Special Economic Zones. According to this recommendation, SEZ should be renamed as 3 E's, that is Employment and Economic Enclaves. Focus should not only be on boosting exports but also on employment creation and GDP growth rate. Incentives given to companies in SEZ should depend upon factors such as value addition, technology adoption, etc. This would encourage the companies to innovate and compete at the global level. Apart from this, integration into global value chain is of utmost importance. Invite large anchor firms in critical products to set up operations in India. Government initiatives like simplified labor laws, PLI incentives, low corporate tax on new manufacturing operations, and scrapping of retrospective tax would encourage firms searching for China +1 location to shift base in India. Undoubtedly, boosting export is need of the hour, but it should not be pursued at the expense of other sectors. Rather than focusing entirely on boosting exports, India needs to focus on boosting manufacturing sector, attract FDI, and thus promote economic growth. In that case, exports from India would automatically increase. So rather than treating export as a means to promote economic growth, the government must perceive the export as end of economic growth. Our next discussion is based on this article which featured on page number 8 of the Hindu newspaper. This article is related to recent incidents of firing at the Assam-Meghalaya border. On November 22, 5 villagers from Meghalaya and an Assam forest guard were killed and 2 others were seriously injured in a firing incident along the boundary between the two states. The Assam government said the incident happened after its forest guard tried to intercept a truck smuggling illegal timber. These incidents along the interstate borders are not uncommon, particularly in northeast. As a matter of fact, Assam has a boundary with all its neighbors except Tripura. Now, if you will try to relate this article with your GS syllabus, you will find GS paper 2 mentions the issues and challenges pertaining to the federal structure. This article is also important from the perspective of GS paper 3 topic of internal security. In this discussion, we will be looking at various interstate border disputes and the reason behind them. The boundary dispute is especially problematic in Northeast India. Border dispute between various states in Northeast India have been recurring since 1960s. These disputes emerged after states such as Nagaland, Meghalaya, Arunachal Pradesh and Mizoram were carved out from state of Assam. However, almost all these border disputes have their origin in colonial times and reflect the consequences of British policy of creating and recreating boundaries for administrative convenience based on annexation and exploration of territories in the region. So let's have a look at the border disputes in Northeast India. Now first is Assam-Mizoram. The border dispute between Assam and Mizoram is a legacy of two British era notification of 1875 and 1933, when Mizoram was called Lushai Hills, a district in Assam. The 1875 notification differentiated Lushai Hills from the plains of Chachar and the other demarcated boundary between Lushai Hills and Manipur. While Mizoram became a state only in 1987, following years of insurgency, it still insists on the boundary decided in 1875. Assam, on the other hand, wants the boundary demarcated in 1986. As the Assam Chief Minister said recently, why would we accept a colonial era order? In that case, entire Mizoram was part of Assam before the independence. While Mizoram says the 1986 agreement is not acceptable as the Mizo civil society was not consulted at that time. Now let's take up Arunachal Pradesh and Assam border dispute. Arunachal's grievance is that the reorganization of northeastern states unilaterally transferred several forested tracts in the plains that had traditionally belonged to hill tribal chiefs and communities to Assam. Now let's have a look at the Meghalaya-Assam border dispute, which is the basis of recent unfortunate incidents. The problem between Assam and Meghalaya started when the latter challenges, that is, Meghalaya challenged the Assam Reorganization Act of 1971, which gave blocks 1 and 2 of Mikir Hills or present-day Karbi Anglong district to Assam. Meghalaya contends that both these blocks formed part of erstwhile United Khasi and Jaintia Hills district when it was notified in 1835. Now, joint survey to disputed land has been taken up and chief ministers of both the states have held several meetings to resolve this issue. But there is no consensus on solution till yet. Now, the longest running border dispute in the northeast is between Assam and Nagaland, which began soon after Nagaland became a state in 1963. The Nagaland State Act of 1962 had defined the state's borders according to a 1925 notification when Naga Hills Yeonsang area, that is NHTA, were integrated into a new administrative unit. Nagaland, however, does not accept the boundary delineation and has demanded that new states should have all Naga-dominated areas in North Chachar and Nagaon district. Since Nagaland did not accept its notified borders, tensions between Assam and Nagaland flared up soon after the Nagaland was formed, resulting in the first border clashes in 1965. This was followed by major clashes between two states along the border in 1968, 1979, 1985, 2007 and recently in 2014. Now, having discussed the border issues in Northeast, let us look into other interstate disputes in India. Now first is Karnataka and Maharashtra, which is recently in news also. The Belgaum district is arguably part of one of the biggest interstate border dispute in India. The district has a large Marathi and Kannada speaking population and have been at the center of dispute for a long time. The said area came under Karnataka in 1956 when states were reorganized. Until then, it was under the Bombay Presidency. Now, another dispute is between Haryana and Himachal Pradesh regarding Parvanu region, which has had the spotlight over the border dispute between the two states. It is next to the Panchkula district of Haryana, and the state has claimed parts of the land in Himachal Pradesh as its own. Now, another dispute is related to Himachal Pradesh and Ladakh, where Himachal and Ladakh lay claim to Sarchu, an area on the route between Leh and Manali. It is considered a major point where travelers stop when traveling between the two cities. Sarchu is in between Himachal's Lahul and Spiti district and Leh district in Ladakh. Now the union government has made efforts to resolve these disputes. However, not much success has been achieved as one or the other state remained non-cooperative. Non-resolution of these disputes has given rise to strong community sentiments among states concerned and resultantly vitiated the interstate relations. Further, the security situation of the region is jeopardized with insurgents and criminals gaining the upper hand. The need of hour is to shape public opinion for peaceful borders and redouble efforts for a political solution to these decade-old disputes.